After last video on the mecha set, a lot of you pointed out frame synergies with this setup, namely Jade and Voruna due to having unique traits that allow them to deal a ton of damage, but you also recommended me a lot of other frames which I've then gone and tested. I realised that I was so hyper-focused on the weapon synergy side of things, making this setup really plug and play so any frame can benefit from the mecha set, that I kind of forgot that, oh yeah, warframes can inflict status too, and in the right cases, a lot of them. So that's what I want to go over today. I've picked out a few frames which I believe work really well with the mecha set, along with some builds for them, so let's jump right in. Starting off with Voruna, a frame who I believe is probably the best abuser of the mecha set due to her augment Prey of Dinar. This augment causes Voruna to mark an enemy within 25 meters while under the effects of Shroud of Dinar. This marked target takes 50% more damage moddable by strength, and casting Fangs of Raksh on that marked target causes them to spread their status procs on death by an extra 150%. This percentage range increase isn't affected by range mods, but does benefit from more range since it increases the base spread of Fangs, which is then further buffed by 150%. This effect is so strong as it is basically identical to the mecha set, just without the status amplifications and recursions. However, if the mecha target is tagged by Prey of Dinar's status effects and that ends up killing them, they also pop a nice 30-meter radius of statuses to all nearby enemies, meaning you can get some nice damage chains going. We can take this one step further by subsuming over her fourth ability for Raw, since my bud Animalistic pointed out Mecha Empower is multiplicative with Raw, and since we're replacing her 4 we can make use of Precision Intensify for an even bigger buff. This is downright busted and amazing at clearing hordes of trash mobs, and is almost able to rival a pre-nerf Prey of Dinar back before it had line of sight checks. I will say that this build is super energy hungry, and packing a weapon that can easily one-hit headshots like the Kuva Chakur to force orb drops with Lycat's Hunt is ideal, as well as to one-shot acolytes. It's just really nice comfort to have. Thank you to all those who commented about this, by the way. I completely forgot Voruna did this, and good god does the mecha set make her better. For the build, we are using the double mecha mods for the set bonus, Prey of Dinar, Blind Rage and Precision Intensify for strength, Archon Stretch and Augur Reach for the range, Archon Continuity for duration, Primed Flow for energy max. The Exilus should be Cunning Drift here, as her passive gives us knockdown immunity anyway, and it's even more range for her 2 spread. I'm just too lazy to install an Aura Former. For our arcanes, we are using Impetus, since we are able to very easily proc all 13 status effects due to using Fangs of Raksh. This means we get an extra 39% efficiency and 78% strength, which is far more than we can get from Augmented. The other arcane we're using is Steadfast for the 20% chance of 3 free ability casts. However, even with these 2 arcanes combined, our energy still isn't the most consistent, so I do have to recommend either a stock of energy pads or using Xeneric to try and patch up your energy economy. For the shards, I am using 1 Equilibrium Violet shard, 1 Energy Max Blue shard, 2 Cast Speed Tau shards, and 1 Duration Red shards, but if I'm honest, I would replace the Duration shard with another Equilibrium shard. Another frame I saw people talk about a lot in the comments is Jade. By making use of her 2 aura slots, we can run both Mecha Empower and have a spare slot for another mod of your choice, which gives her a lot more flexibility in modding when it comes to mecha setups. Jade's MO when it comes to her synergy with the mecha set is her first ability, Light's Judgment, and her 4th ability, Glory on High. Light's Judgment and Glory on High apply a debuff on enemies called Judgment. Enemies affected by Judgment take an additional 50% damage from all sources, including DOT effects. Unfortunately, this doesn't double dip, but it's still a good damage increase to our DOT procs. Thankfully, we can still increase her damage with her Deathbringer buff, granting her and all allies plus 100% weapon damage additive with base damage mods, which we can then combine with her 3rd ability, Onophim Eyes, to armor strip enemies within a 70-degree cone in front of Jade to help our DOT procs deal as much damage as possible. The real spice comes from Jade's 4th ability, Glory on High, where she gets access to her exalted orbitars, fittingly named Glory. Glory fires out projectiles which explode in a 2-meter radius on impact with a 10% chance of inflicting judgment, and by tapping Alt Fire, detonates all enemies affected by Judgment, dealing damage in a 4-meter radius, moddable by range, and enemies standing within her first ability explode with an extra 50% range. So in tight enough tiles, you can get a ton of enemies all hitting each other with their explosions, which, oh by the way, can proc status, like heat. Now this is already pretty strong, but we can push this even further, since Glory, much like every other exalted weapon, gets a damage increase when we increase our power strength. We can cram as many separate sources of strength into this build as we can, snapshot those high values, and get even more damage on Glory, so we can go about our average everyday AC 130 routine. Now, where is the mecha synergy? Well, remember how in last video I said that damage vulnerabilities on the targets receiving mecha statuses increase their damage? Yeah, this applies to Judgment. Combined with Glory's respectable heat damage output and decent status chance, you can make this thing spam out heat procs like it's nobody's business. And hey, tack on some added viral for heat priming, and you're well on your way to cosplaying an AC 130 with a nuclear payload. For the build then, double mecha mods, aerodynamic, aviator, and adaptation for damage reduction, and I'll be honest, aerodynamic is entirely optional here. You can run pistol amp to get more damage out of Glory since it counts as a secondary weapon. Archon Vitality is on here to double instances of heat procs, Archon Intensify and Blind Rage for strength, Archon Stretch for range, and I know you can't regenerate energy while in Glory, but it's still nice to have outside of that. But if you're tight on space, feel free to run regular Stretch here. Archon Continuity for duration, Primed Flow for energy max, Molt Augmented for more strength, and Arcane Velocity for attack speed on Glory. When it comes to actually playing Jade, you want to stack up as many different strength buffs as you can. Augmented, Archon Intensify, Sling Strength, Strength of the 7, even Power Drain if you're running it, and then activate Glory before swapping to Deathbringer. This way Glory snapshots those incredibly high strength buffs, and Deathbringer will increase your damage output even further. I tend to stick mostly to her primary fire, but if you want you can tap Alt Fire to detonate enemies marked by Judgment. This deals a ton of damage provided enemies are all in close proximity, as it allows them to be hit by each other's explosions, but be careful, we're running negative efficiency on here, which means that the cost for this is very high, and if you're not paying attention to your energy, or there's too many enemies that you don't see marked by Judgment, casting the Alt Fire can very easily knock you out of Glory on high, meaning you lose all those snapshotted buffs. And what's better is that this build is only going to get stronger. Come March with the Tech Rock Encore update, exalted weapons are going to get arcane slots. So by adding your choice of a damage arcane like Merciless, Flare, Enervate, or even Fortifier, Glory is going to get a huge buff in its damage, and also allows us to free up a mod slot for not having to run Hornet Strike. This is a very strong setup, and I adore it. For a frame like Jade, who is touted as overpowered and broken on launch, I very actually rarely see her being played in missions, so hopefully this setup will inspire you to pick her up again and go out and commit some war crimes from on high. Anyway, onto our next frame, and I know that the full setup from last video had us outsourcing Toxin and Heat to companions and helmets respectively, but what if we had some power that could add these two elements to our guns? Maybe also tack on Electrus to give us some freedom with weapon modding, and maybe Cold for some more survivability. Enter Citrine and her Prismatic Gem, an ability which summons a gem which emits a 15-meter radius, moddable by range, and while Citrine and her allies are within the radius, their attacks gain plus 100% status chance and plus 100% status duration, moddable by strength, which is additive with status chance and duration mods. Every 0.4 seconds when Citrine hits an enemy while either she or the enemy is inside this radius, the gem fires out a beam, dealing 1000 damage of each basic elemental type with a force status proc, that being Heat, Toxin, Electricity, and Cold. Meaning you can just mod your weapons for Slash and Gas and get all 5 DOTs for Mecha Status Amplification. This is already pretty good, but remember that the Mecha Status Amplification is affected by crit, so casting her 4th ability, which sends your weapon's critical chance to 300% on attacks that hit the crystal growths, means that we can see some very high status damage numbers, especially if this is the Mecha Mark target, as those statuses are then spread over that 30-meter radius. Technically, modding for Slash is optional anyway, because Fractalized Blast procs Slash and Puncture, but this is a really low damage value, so I recommend still modding for Slash. Now, the only main restriction with this power is that the gem only hits a single target, and due to its 0.4 second cooldown, AoE weapons are off the table. However, this cooldown is only for the entity that inflicted the damage. So, by using Duplex Bond, On-Call Crew, Spectre, and the Carl team, we can get a whole army to swarm in and deal these elemental procs to all enemies they strike. It is nuts. Prismatic Gem works very well as a set and forget kind of power. Throw it in the general area you're planning on standing or killing enemies in, and then follow through on that intention. As such, using it with other set and forget weapons works pretty well, as the constant damage ticks they deal will proc Prismatic Gem over and over again. Personally, my favourite way to run this is with a Blast Influence setup on the Zenistar. The more combo you have when you toss the disc, the longer it lasts. So by running for base damage, range, attack speed, elements, initial combo and elemental damage, we can get a weapon we can toss on top of our gem for passive status application, which, oh yeah, Influence, spreads those other elemental procs to all nearby enemies. For the Zenistar build, we are running Primed Point Strike for damage since the disc doesn't get Condition Overload, Galvanized Elementalist for status damage, Vicious Frost, Volcanic Edge and Voltaic Strike for blast and electric, Galvanized Reflex for initial combo, Primed Fury for attack speed, Primed Reach for range. The stance doesn't matter that much since we're using the disc anyway, and I've not used an Exilus adapter, but your best bet is probably going to be Dispatch Overdrive since the disc doesn't seem to benefit from any of the Tennokai mods, save for the increased wind-up speed. What if one disc just isn't enough? What if we want more discs? What if we need more discs? Enter the Azima! Yeah, we're getting fucky with this one, lads. Its alt fire shoots out a rotating turret which we can mod for viral and heat to prime enemies, and proc Prismatic Gem for even more statuses, which we spread with the mecha set. This is my build for it: Lethal Torrent and Galvanized Diffusion for multi-shot, Creeping Bullseye for crit chance and Prime Target Cracker for crit damage, Pistol Pestilence, Frostbite and Scorch for viral and heat, my Riven which is giving me plus damage, plus crit damage and minus projectile speed, but you can replace this with Hornet Strike, and my Exilus is Lethal Momentum to counteract the Bane from my Riven, but you should run Pistol Ammo Mutation here since it allows you to spam out the turrets even more without any fear of running out of ammo. The Arcane slot is surprisingly flexible. If you want more utility, you can run Fortify to generate Overguard since the turret counts as secondary damage, thus gives you Overguard generation, or as a damage tool you can run Enerve It for full crit or Merciless for damage. Now, is this any good? Sort of? I mean, it makes the funny Azima Altfire a legitimately okay weapon that you can use, and I run this for double disc meta, but you can really use whatever. A priming Epitaph does much the same thing. Now, if 2 lingering fields of damage isn't enough, the Ogress with Nightwatch Napalm slots neatly into this setup. By making use of its very high heat procs it can dish out combined with Rifle Elementalist, we can easily get a lot of damage on a bunch of enemies thanks to the massive explosion radius. For the Ogress build, we are using Galvanized Chamber for multi-shot, Semi-Rifle Cannonade for damage, Nightwatch Napalm to leave behind our lingering fields, Malignant Force, Primed Cryo Rounds and Hellfire for viral heat, Rifle Elementalist for more status damage, Primed Firestorm for a bigger AoE, Sniper Ammo Mutation to make sure we don't run out of ammo, and Merciless for base damage. Lastly, this is the Citrine build. Double Mecha mods for its set bonus, Archon Stretch and Augur Reach for range, Primed Flow for energy max, Archon Continuity for duration, Blind Rage and Umbral Intensify for strength, Equilibrium for energy sustain since her 1 drops orbs, but you could replace it with Recrystallize if you wanted, but I find that a lot of the time I was killing in such a wide radius that the spread to other targets just kind of failed. Prime Sure Footage for a huge DPS increase, Molt Augmented and Arcane Impetus for more strength and efficiency. Arcane Impetus here because we are constantly getting 7 status procs, the 4 primary elements from her 3, Corrosive from Archon Continuity, as well as Puncture and Slash from her 1, meaning that we can get a lot of status chance and status duration thanks to Prismatic Gem. For Archon shards, I've been running 2 car speed shards, 2 toxin status damage shards, and 1 equilibrium shard, but this isn't something I've messed with too extensively, and I'm not 100% sold on the toxin status shards, so feel free to drop them for whatever you want. I would probably recommend a bit more duration maybe to increase the lifespan of your Prismatic Gem. Overall, thanks to be able to outsource 4 of the 5 DOT elements, Citrine is a very solid abuser of the mecha setup and is able to do normal Citrine things very consistently while also blowing up rooms every so often, and that tends to be a trend. Frames that benefit from the mecha set just do what they do normally, and then also kind of blow up a room on occasion. It's really silly and I love it. Next up is Nezha with his 4th ability's Augment, Divine Retribution. This mod causes all enemies impaled by divine spears to share status procs. So deal a slash proc to 1 and all enemies caught by the spears get hit by it. And by recasting the power, you can cause an expedite suffering like effect, wherein it ends all slash, toxin and heat procs on the target, and condensing them down into one big hit of damage. This, when combined with Blazing Chakram, which not only causes more orb drops, but also applies heat alongside a damage vulnerability, so enemies take even more damage from our DOT procs. Now, this setup really excels when we kit him out with as many weapons to deal as much status as possible, hence why I chose to pair him with the Convectrix, a frankly busted beam weapon with the notable advantage of 1 fucktillion slash procs on demand, which we spread to all enemies affected by the spears, resulting in mass death. I've gone for a fairly standard viral slash build. I did toy around with heat, electric, gas, blast, and toxin, and found that toxin and electric came pretty close, but still didn't hold a candle to viral's time to kill. Here's the build for it. Galvanized Hell for multi-shot, Galvanized Savvy for gun CO, Primed Point Blank for base damage, Shotgun Elementalist to amp up our slash ticks, Shotgun Barrage and Frigid Blast for viral, Critical Deceleration for crit chance, my Riven, which is giving me crit chance and crit damage, but you can replace this with Prime Ravage, or if you want to free up a Warframe Arcane slot, Shotgun Barrage, Galvanized Acceleration in the Exilus for more range, and Primary Crux, as the Convectrix is both a ammo-hungry and status machine, and Crux lets us solve both of those issues with one Arcane slot. The other weapon I like to pair with this setup is the Harmony. As one of my viewers, Henry Fernandez, pointed out on stream, enemies hit by Divine Spears inflict the knockdown status, meaning they're applicable for melee afflictions, which led to this very funny clip on stream. There's like minimal time difference between me and you. Okay, so then we just bat. Oh! What the fuck? Okay, sure. I don't think that's really the mecha set, I think that's just funny slash things, but that's funny. So, by running a pure heavy attack setup designed to spam out as many heavy slashes and inflict a bunch of high value DOT procs as possible, we can get a shed load of damage, especially thanks to Harmony's unique trait, which causes heavy attacks to condense all damage over time procs into a single instance, resulting in very high damage numbers. Here's the build for that, and Reaper Prime does very similar things, I just prefer Harmony as I find its unique trait very good at dealing with certain heavier units that aren't impaled by the spears. Speaking of, this build does have one major downside, which is these bastards. See, enemies with Overguard can't be impaled by Divine Spears, so if even one of these little fucks is present, you can't spear anything nearby, meaning your damage output tumbles. It sucks and is a pain, so I would recommend having some way to apply Magnetic to help bump them off a little bit quicker, be that a secondary primer or damage tool. I know that he can do some funny stuff with Toxin Elemental Ward due to the Toxin proc dealing 5% of an enemy's max HP as damage, and using 5 Toxin Tau Shards to increase this even further, but I found it kind of inconsistent. Toxic Ward has a tendency to forget it's an ability on occasion and won't actually apply Toxin for a solid 5 seconds despite the enemy being in the radius. Plus, to get the most out of this, you want to mod for more strength to increase Divine Retribution's damage multiplier on Toxin procs, but modding for more strength means we mod for less range, which kinda sucks. Hence why I've gone for Raw to increase the damage of our TOTs. Is it basic? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. If you do want to see the Toxic Ward example, I've left the link down below to JelMei's video on the topic, which I highly recommend you watch after this video. Anyway, here's the Nezha build. Double mecha mods, Archon Stretch, Augur Reach, and Overextended for range, Divine Retribution, Umbral Intensify for strength, Archon Continuity for duration, Adaptation for survivability, Controlled Slide since I don't like his passive and the added strength is nice, Arcane Aegis for comfort, and Arcane Tempo for an increased fire rate on the Convectrix, but you can treat this as a flex slot. As for shards, I run 1 cast speed, 2 strength, and 2 equilibrium to turn the health orb drops from Blazing Chakram into energy. Now, if we're talking about inflicting tons of status procs, then one of the best is Koumei. Her 1st and 4th ability have the capacity to inflict huge areas with all physical and elemental status effects, which means you're more than likely to tag the marked enemy with at least a couple procs. This also allows us to run weapons with good multiplicative gun CO and let the killing blow spread those procs. And if you're lucky enough to pull 2-fold Torment or Vicious Barb as decrees, then you will start to see a lot of damage thanks to the increased status and crit from these decrees respectively. But it's not just those 2 specific decrees that make her go freak crazy style with it. Fearsome Bonanza, Blazing Bombardment, Shattering Frost, Bomber's Scene's Malice, Critical Frost, Wormling's Aid, Stormcaller, and Fault Finder all provide you with some form of elemental buff, be that on afflicted targets or allowing you to do those procs. This grants Koumei a massive amount of flexibility when it comes to weapon modding, as you don't really have to worry about your weapons inflicting the status. Now, this is a rose-tinted view. You could get very unlucky and not pull any good decrees, but the gameplay you're seeing in the background is decreeless. I'm not casting her too. In fact, I'd have it subsumed off just for this demo, just to show you that you don't need it. Koumei gets shit for being inconsistent due to the nature of her decrees, but this is just proof that you don't need decrees to function on Koumei, and you can build assuming you get none, and then add the decrees as if they're some extra bonus. Now, this is a really strong synergy with Koumei, and I know that a lot of the community really hated her on launch, so why wasn't this talked about? Why wasn't this synergy with Koumei and the mecha set discussed by any of the major Warframe YouTubers? Oh right, yeah, Panzer. Forgot they have this thing glued to their ass because they're stuck in a meta that died with Abyss of Gath. Oh well, here's the build. Double mecha, Archon Continuity for duration and corrosive procs, Archon Flow for energy max and orb drops, Archon Stretch for range and energy generation, Fast Deflection and Vigilante Vigor for survivability, Rolling Guard for status cleanse, Catalyzing Shield to let her shield gate off her 4 using 2 Augur mods on her secondary, Arcane Aegis for survival, and Arcane Energize for further energy sustain. For shards we are using 2 Equilibrium shards for comfort, 1 Tau cast speed, and 2 max corrosive stacks. I've not optimized these shards, so feel free to go crazy with them. I would advise at least 1 Equilibrium and cast speed shard though for quality of life. I know that Koumei is a very divisive frame to a lot of the community, and pretty unjustly in my opinion. With this setup enabling companions and multi-seer weapons, she's really good and super fun to play. Okay, now we're gonna get onto some stupid shit. I saw this comment mentioned using Grendel with Gastro. This augment causes enemies launched by Regurgitate to bounce up to 3 times, creating a field of gas damage for each bounce, which lingers for 8 seconds, dealing damage over time. Regurgitate is already a pretty good ability with high toxin damage and a built-in armor strip, so making it bounce and tick gas with mecha leads to some silly shit. Especially since Regurgitate's projectile has some weird properties with its bounce, in that it can get stuck on enemies, the floor, terrain, suddenly lose all projectile speed, and result in dropping all 3 gas clouds in the same spot, making you get a very funny zone of lots of big damage. What's more is you can actually vacuum up your mecha mark target with Feast, meaning that you now have total control over when and where you unleash its 20-meter radial explosion. This build makes very good use of both Energy Nexus, which thanks to Nourish keeps our energy topped off at all times, and Arcane Battery, since his passive gives us 1500 armor when we have 5 enemies in his stomach. Which, yeah, this works with the armor bonus from the mecha set, meaning we can easily hit over 1000 energy max with this build. This can go higher with the Augment mod Gourmand, which grants an extra 150 armor for each enemy in his stomach, at the cost of Feast taking 200 health instead of energy. And I don't like or use this augment for 2 reasons. One, we are already super tight on build space and I really couldn't justify the mod slot, and 2, funnily enough, having enough energy to cast Feast isn't really the issue. Is this overkill? Kind of, but remember, we lose 250 armor every time we cast Regurgitate since we lose an enemy from our stomach. This means we also lose the added energy max associated with it from Arcane Battery. It's for this reason I recommend casting 1 or 2 Regurgitates before using Feast again, to comfortably stay between 3 and 5 enemies so that your energy max never drops too low to the point you drop out of Meatball form. Speaking of Meatball form, Polarize is such a slept-on power in Grendel's kit, especially on this setup, as not only is it a funny movement tool, but also it lets you cast your powers without any animations, meaning we can move, grab enemies with Feast, spam out Regurgitate shots, and cast Nourish without being rooted to the spot, as well as providing us with a nice, 28 meter radius bloody armor strip. Here is the build. Double mecha, Umbral Vitality and Adaptation for survivability, Overextended for range, Umbral Intensify and Blind Rage for strength, Energy Nexus for energy sustain, Gastro for the gas clouds, Molt Augmented for yet more strength, and Arcane Battery for energy max. If you really wanted to run him with something like Raw over his 3, you should use Primed Sure-Footed in your Exilus slot, but if you, like me, are meatball, pilled, and regurgitate maxing, slotting catapult for more funny movement, or just cunning drift for more range, I guess. You're a nerd. For shards, I'm using 3 duration shards for comfort on nourish, but again, these could be anything you want, and then 2 Tau toxin status damage shards because, again, regurgitate deals toxin damage as well as gas, so it's more damage amplification with the mecha set. This is silly and funny and I adore it. Thank you again for telling me about Gastro. I almost never play Grendel and probably wouldn't have if you didn't highlight this augment to me, but god damn, this shit is funny and the main reason I play him more now. I want to real quick touch on Rhino again since I forgot to add the builds from last video, but either way, here they are. Lastly, I want to go over Mag. You know the name of the channel, of course I want to go over Mag, and I'll be the first to admit that she has no real specific synergy with the mecha set, save for the grouping her kit provides, meaning you have a higher enemy concentration, so the mecha status spread is more effective. Consider this more another demonstration in the flexibility of the mecha set. By using the epitaph, we can spread heat to a lot of enemies trapped in Magnetize. We can also hit them a couple times with the router to build up combo. For our main damage dealer, the Hate Incarnon with its augment Burning Hate, which gives us plus 120% status damage on enemies affected by heat procs. Combine this with Galvanized Elementalist, electric damage, and melee influence, and we can get some very dumb damage. Like I said in the first video, the mecha set works very well on any frame, including my beloved Mag. Builds are on screen, go fucking crazy with it. Most melee weapons work, I just chose the Hate because of its augment, but other good ones are stuff like the Dual Ica thanks to the Toxic Clouds, the Bow Prime due to it having really high status for Blast Influence, and the Nami Solo Incarnon because it's the Nami Solo Incarnon. Last few things with some addendums and additions to last video. 1. The damage from the mecha set status spread counts as both companion damage and companion ability damage, meaning we can use it with Contagious Bond to increase the range even more, and to proc the Archon mods. I'd say that the best two here are Stretch and Continuity, since Flow needs 10 cold stacks and enemies tend to die before they hit that in most cases, and Vitality already isn't used on many frames, so it's kinda hard to fit into builds. 2. Mecha Pulse has no cap. I'm just a dummy and saw it didn't go any higher in Simulacra, but that's because Simulacra itself has a 20 enemy cap. In missions it can go much higher, and in really high enemy density, you can easily hit a few 1000% armor increases, which can lead to Grendel and Rhino having a very large energy max for a while thanks to Arcane Battery. And 3rd, I want to say that I know there are other frames that work well with this setup, but these are the ones I have the most time and experience with, hence why I decided to report on them. Hildren works very well due to heat inherit setups. Gauss can too, but I find using him as a Thermal Sunder Blast nuke is much more effective. Equinox could maybe do some things with her MAME nukes, though I've not played around with it, so hard to say. Protea and Garuda work very well with the mecha set, but similarly to Gauss with Blast Thunder, they function great even without it, and Lavos is another I saw mentioned in the comments a lot, but he's not a frame I have much experience with outside of a Railjack pilot, so don't really feel comfortable on attempting a build with him just yet. Maybe since his prime is out, I'll pick it up and give it a go, try him out in normal mission again. Who knows, maybe you will see a part 3 of this mecha series. But with that said, I want to thank you all for watching this deeper dive into the mecha set. That companion video I mentioned last time is still in the works, along with another frame bible. The scripts are written and I just have to sit down, record and edit them, but I only got so many hours in a day. Regardless, I hope you all really enjoyed this video, and go and try some of these builds out for yourself. But that's all for today, and I will see you in the next one.